but that was the most torturing thing for me. Because during the training, I at times was like, why are you asking me these questions? I need to get out of here. That was still better. In fact, it was great because it actually helped me breathe. Because day to day, I wasn't breathing efficiently. I freaked out. It's like, I am not sending this letter to that person. It's like, no, you're not. You're writing it out. And I believe it's to be more like, to face it and almost be at peace with it. I'm working on myself. I'm not changing the other person. And that was the flip of the switch for me.
Who was that letter to?
To my dad. Yeah.
I didn't actually come onto this episode to unpack my journey or myself, but it's hard not to remember stuff.
Yeah.
Round 2, I think the audience won't know this, but we went to record before, and it was a tough conversation, man. This is a tough topic that we're about to get into, so I just want to say welcome back for the second time, and going to introduce everyone to Felix. What's up, Felix?
What up?
Felix is a very good friend of mine that I've known for a super long time, and also a personal trainer. And it's actually quite nice, having you on this episode, or having you on this particular podcast, because the podcast is called Confessions of a Personal Trainer. And the personal trainer bit is usually in reference to me, but in this episode, I guess we are doing Confessions of Felix, the personal trainer.
I've got nothing to confess.
We shall see. From knowing you for a long time, I've obviously been able to go through some of your journey with you from the outside and as an observer. And there's just some things that I guess we will have challenges, and getting to know you over time and unpacking you and understanding you a little bit. It's been one of my challenges, actually.
You're not the first. I found out.
You've been a bit of a closed book, and so you've gradually over time, started to open up, and not just to everybody else, but I guess to yourself in a way. And that's another part of your journey I've kind of observed, which is why it's good to have you here today to talk about something that you are going through, I suppose, even now. Depression. So I still remember we do our sort of quarterly catch-ups, I suppose, and I still remember meeting up with you and just catching up over the last 4, 5, 6 months, however long it had been. And it was the first time you were sort of telling me that you'd gone to a therapist, and through that process you had discovered that you had depression. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess you can call it that. I'll expand it a bit more, but yeah.
Let's expand on that. Describe that to me. What is it that you found?
Yeah, because everyone is so different, so it's hard for me to define it, whether it's depression or not. All I know is for myself is something it's been very uncertain in myself, like my thought process and everything, but I wasn't too sure what it was. I've always been keeping myself busy. So whatever thing I might need to maybe seek a bit more inside of myself, I didn't need to because I was always busy. But it was only when we had the lockdowns, I had a lot of time to myself. Things when I reflect on it now, things I would use to cope or maybe escape, could be anything from listening to music, commuting to the gym, working, has always allowed me to just keep moving forward. But then when suddenly we have a lot of time to ourselves, that was really challenging. You know, it was more challenging than just day-to-day life as before. So that was quite bizarre to me. I didn't know what was wrong. I don't know what was going on. In fact, I thought it was the chance to, you know, enjoy ourselves. Oh, we don't have to wake up to an alarm clock whatsoever. But as days went on, things just became more tougher. And I wasn't too sure what was going on. And I can't really explain it to anyone. At least I didn't think I could anyway. So I think it lasted for quite a while until a point where my girlfriend suggested that, oh, maybe you can find some answers if you speak to a professional. And that never really crossed my mind. So that planted a seed. I thought, yeah, actually, in fact, when she mentioned that, I thought, there's hope there. You know, I can find some answers. And I believe it must have been another 5-6 months later where I thought, you know what, it's time now, because this is going nowhere. I'm just spinning in circles. So I tried, and I didn't know what to do. Like, how do you even look for it? And you know, Dan, this made me think of, when someone is looking for a personal trainer, what do they do? And I can only guess, maybe, you know, a quick Google search. And that's what I did. I think that's what I did. Yeah, and then you go on one of the directory website or something. I may have asked a friend if he knows anyone, and then, long story short, I tried 2 professionals, and it just didn't. It felt like I was in school and I'm confessing to a teacher or something. Maybe that's something, you know, that I've. So yeah, it just didn't feel right. So one of them even suggested that I should take some medication before we can even proceed, because and I think it was all down to I couldn't connect with that professional, so I wasn't able to really express how I felt, because I was quite confused myself. And but I did think about it, because I thought, if there's anything just to numb the noise, give it to me. And it was only when I went to see a physio who I know really well, who's also a Feldenkrais practitioner. I go to see him for a session, and normally we would just do a small talk. You know, come in, hey, how's it going? I'm good. What shall we work on today? Oh, let's explore this area, that area, and then that's it. But this time, when he said, you know, what's been happening, and then, you know, 10 minutes in, I was just talking to him, and then he's someone who's very careful. He wouldn't just give suggestions or advice for the sake of it. But when I told him about the medication, he said, you know what, I know you have something going on at the moment, but I don't think you need it, at least not now. And that was great. That was a relief for me. I was like, okay, cool. So then that's when I found another therapist from a recommendation from a friend. And actually, she recommended the therapist to me right from the beginning. But I was such in a low space that I just assumed I can't work with anyone I know, because what if they find out? What if that professional was to tell my friend? Which never happens, but that's how low I was. You know, I was so worried about things that wasn't necessary. But it was only then where I thought, you know, I tried to from searching online. Let me get in touch with this therapist. And after the first session, no, it wasn't the first session. It was just a consult, a 20-minute chat, because she wanted to see if I was suitable to work with her. And that was a green flag for me from the get-go. And then knowing that she has background in something about movement therapy, and wanting to chat with me before we decide whether to work together, that was a great start. And then once, and then the rest was history, really. I ended up working with that therapist for 2 years.
Well, there's a couple of things you mentioned there that I guess I didn't actually consider, even though one of them seems pretty obvious, but it just doesn't come to my mind. And then the other one is something I didn't consider at all, and I'm going to ask probably to expand on both of those, but I suppose the first one being medication. And I guess to some extent, you always think of medicating mental health issues as a very sort of American thing, and obviously it's not. Do you know much about like what kind of medications they actually suggest? And you obviously didn't try any of the medications, right?
No.
What did they recommend to you?
I can't remember, to be fair. I don't remember. It was something I imagined to just, I guess, clear my mind. Maybe it's to do, I can't remember what the medications were. Maybe she'd even name them. You know, maybe she would take it forward if I said yes, and then she would then explain more. But she didn't push it, you know, but I think she did say, like, if we don't get further, or, you know, if we can't get into this, then, you know, she won't be able to help. Right. So that's when I decided to, not go work. But in terms of the medication, it was mainly, I can't remember the names. I just had a brief idea way after this journey because of listening to other professionals like Gabor Mate, where he talks about majority of the time medication doesn't necessarily help the person. It's actually working on yourself.
It's like, and so what made it, what was interesting about what you were saying was that there was a point when you were low that you were like, yeah, just give me the medication, anything to clear my mind.
Yes.
And that's really struck me because, you know, I guess to be in that place where it's kind of like you would actually be like, yeah, because I know you well enough to know that that's not necessarily, you know, you're very solution orientated, but you're obviously very much into, you know, exercise and nutrition and like finding solutions through that. And so to take somebody like yourself who is actually like, do you know what, right about now I would actually be okay with medicating myself. I don't know if I'm really using the right words, but it's almost a little bit scary to think that somebody can get to that point. I'm not a big fan of drugs to take the pain away. And I guess we're not just talking about depression and medication. People use alcohol, other forms of recreational drugs to sort of kind of distract themselves from the issues and difficulties that they're dealing with. And, you know, much, like I really just am aware and don't want to be in that situation. And I have been in the past where that's kind of where I've kind of gone. So, yeah, it really, it's interesting that that's kind of, that even there was a therapist that said, yeah, before we proceed, that's the first thing that we're going to do.
And I think based on the job title, I think that's a classic format where they'll try this doesn't work, and then let's go with that. So I think that's why as well. Whereas the therapist I ended up working with was more on just like what I think from my impression. I went into it without really knowing what to expect. But if I had to sum it up, what my experience is, they're not there to give you answers. They're there to help you unpack it yourself. And you just need someone from a distance to guide you in some ways. And And that's why it worked out really well for me, because that's what I felt I needed, but I couldn't put into words. And, imagine telling a friend, I don't know, it's like, I'm really chaotic at the moment. I just need someone to guide me inside. It's like, what do you even do? Right?
Yeah.
Well, at least that's what I thought anyway. And I couldn't, I couldn't put it into words. If someone was to ask me as simple as, what's going on? I would probably just freeze. It's like, where do I start? I don't know. Because it's almost like I'm accessing something that's been closed for so long, and I've just opened it, and suddenly everything becomes overwhelming. So yeah, when I reflect on it, I can't. It may have been going on for many years. I suspect it has, but there comes to a point where maybe because I had so much time where I can't help but to face it. Because every other time I was able to distract myself, but at the same time, you see, I'm also at this point where it's like, had there not been lockdowns and I just kept going, maybe I would have been fine. Who knows, right? So I just take it as it is, and I try not to talk in absolute. Like, thankfully for this therapist, maybe the first therapist I took medication, I would have been better. It's one of them things where I just go whatever. I trust my gut, and then go with it, and then see what happens.
That for someone to ask you what's going on and for you to feel frozen, I'd almost say, I can relate to that. And I imagine a lot of people listening right now can relate to that. How often do we ask people, how are you? Like in that sort of very genuine way of like, I'm listening if you tell me. But they just don't have it in them in that moment to unpack the overwhelm and break it down and sort of articulate to you, like, look, this is what's going on and this is how it's making me feel. And listening to you there, and I kind of put myself in that situation, and I was like, yeah, I don't think I can really answer that question very well either. I guess a part of my curiosity in this conversation is also trying to understand your journey and your experience with therapy, and maybe making some decisions for myself, as I imagine maybe people listening right now could be.
Yeah, I would say, again, granted, is like everything was relatively new, where I'm almost jumping into the deep end of exploring all this uncertainty within myself. And whilst at the same time still running my business, working as a personal trainer, and it's almost a joke because during that time I was the busiest. Yeah. And and as challenging as therapy was, it's been a life-saving in some sense, because I really thrived on the challenge. Sometimes a session, it will take me 15-20 minutes before I can get into the groove and talk, because I'll just end up, my mind will just go blank, for example. But then coincidentally, my work, because I am working with someone else one-on-one directly, that was a chance for me to almost take a pause. That was a pause within the chaos, if you will. So that's what the therapist said, is like, you used your work to I'm not sure what she called it, regulate, but let's just say the work helps me, because it's a chance for me to not necessarily escape, but just take a pause. And because generally I'm very curious about other people, so that's why when it's one-on-one, within that hour session, I can just focus on someone else. And it helps me be, I'm a better PT then. At the same time, I can take a pause. So then when it comes to my personal life afterwards, I can then start working on it again. So it's been incredible, for sure. Because I thought the worst case scenario, times when, like an example, times of getting out of bed was almost impossible, difficult. But it's it's the contract with my client that I turn up on time.
Right.
And, it's my morals, my values that whenever I work with someone, I commit to it. And when it doesn't work out, for example, when I'm late, I would like to think there's always a good reason. And so that, that's helped me. That helped me during the journey, because I can't imagine what it would be like if, I didn't have a business. I had all the time in the world. At one point, I probably thought, I would think having all the time to work on myself would be ideal. I think that would make things more crazy, because you're constantly ruminating,
I suppose that's what lockdowns were, right?
Exactly, yeah. So, or even ruminating, I didn't even know, sure I pronounced that right. Never heard of it before, but it was only when I read a book on depression, everything, a lot of things ticked the box. But what I'm trying to get at is, I can't say that I was suffering with depression. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But ultimately, it's still personal growth for me.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, that's what it is. And that's how I've always seen it.
You mentioned in therapy sessions and on some occasions it would take you like 15-20 minutes to get into it. What was that switch at that point where you may be in that sort of freeze state at the beginning? What is going on in your mind, or how are you feeling, that sort of leads you to then being able to start talking?
I think the freezing just came about because I know just before entering the room, there's going to be some exploration. And I think my pattern just went into maybe overwhelm. That's why I ended up freezing. At the same time, either way, it was okay. And that's something I've learned. The therapist would be there. Ideally, if it was the whole 50 minutes, it's not going to be productive. But if that was the case, then it is what it is. But normally it will take about, like I said, 10-15 minutes. And during that time, I wouldn't be able to explain to you why that was the case. I wasn't really thinking of anything. It was more of, I could just stare at something and just zone out. And but it was never at a point where it was a dangerous situation per se. The therapist knew, just gave me time. Once in a while, she'll ask me a question, and then once I get into the zone, then we just start.
I imagine again, I didn't expect this to happen, because a lot of what you're saying is stuff that I'm resonating with, and I didn't actually come onto this episode to unpack my journey or myself, but it's hard not to remember stuff.
Yeah. No, but I think that's why when you have, I can't even explain it. I'll probably keep repeating this, so you might need to cut it out. But I'm being very honest here. It's sometimes when I think of it, the journey since when it started about 3 years ago till now, sometimes it just feels surreal. And I don't know, is it worth unpacking this time? But it's like, within this journey, if you will, suddenly something more severe happened to my sister. And this was during my time to work on myself. You know, we joke about, I was like, I was working on myself, and why are you cutting it in? You know, cutting into this, right? But in all seriousness, you know, she went through something very serious. You know, and I guess because it's not me, maybe, but it's like depression, a relapse, however way you describe it. She was in a worse situation than myself, and I'm clear on that because I spent a lot of time with her. And this was during the time when I was still, I guess, like, you know, exploring for myself.
The situation that you had with your sister, who was also experiencing mental health issues, and obviously I'm aware of those because we spoke about those before, and you know, anyone listening to this right now, I guess I'm not going to ask you to completely unpack that story, but I do remember that there were some revelations for you off the back of that experience, and starting to understand that because both of you were experiencing challenges, and that you both had something in common in terms of what some of the source of those challenges were. Could you tell us a little bit more about, you know, what revelations were happening to you whilst you were witnessing her challenge?
During some of the bigger challenges, my mind went, you know, it was a bit chaotic, but even more so now. It's like, what do I do? You know, what do I do with this person? And it was really a chance for me to almost put things into practice to help myself. When someone else is in trouble, how do I check in with myself? How do I regulate myself? Because my pattern would be almost like adapting to the other person, and it wasn't necessary. It was just a pattern. So part of helping my sister has allowed me to help myself. And not even partly, tremendously, if I reflect on it now. But if you ask me that in the middle of it, everything just felt, time was very slow. It felt never ending. I wasn't sure where this would end up. It was very uncertain times helping my sister. But I'm glad to say, very fortunate to say that, you know, we're both in a much better position. And because of it, we understand each other a bit more, and we're closer. And because of her experience, it's made me, it's so vague, but it's like, it's made me, you know, a better person. Because whether that's having more empathy, sympathy, you know, things are just more, if I were to describe it, it's like I can be more present. Present was never in my, you know, in my mind. Mind dictionary, if you will. And so as challenging as times were, we were able to work with each other, help each other. She was in a lot more vulnerable state, but ultimately we helped each other.
What was the lowest point for you in her journey?
The lowest point in her journey? Yeah, it was when she would zone out and also acting differently to someone who I'm used to. And it was very confusing to me. It was very confusing. It's like, it was almost like I was talking to a different person. And during the time when that happens, there's nothing I can do but to just, there was nothing. It was just a lot of confusion. It's like, who am I talking to? It's almost like someone else is in her body.
Mm.
And reflecting on it now, you can call it as like the inner child came out. And I didn't know that was such a thing. You know, now it's like quite obvious to me, right? When I think of in terms of relationships, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, whatsoever. So yeah, we're together because it brings a certain side out of us, right? That needs nurturing and all that stuff. Which was like, oh, that makes sense. But I didn't know any of this stuff before. Sometimes, you know, if I was to like the way I am with my girlfriend, I was like, yeah, of course I wouldn't be like that with the public. Why would I? It's an intimate thing. But it's like, oh, this makes sense now. But I learned that from observing my sister when she really needed help. So that was very bizarre. That was very scary. And just thinking like, wow, will her, you know, quote unquote, her current side of her come back?
You mentioned something about, you know, boyfriend, girlfriend, and do you think for your girlfriend, at your low points, that she would have been feeling the same about you?
Feeling the same, the way I see myself.
So you, during times with your sister when she was struggling and you weren't too sure if you would be able to see the version of her that you once knew return again, but you'd also been through your own low time, and I guess your girlfriend would have had a front row seat to that. Do you feel like maybe she was observing you and wondering if you would have come back to who you were?
Different situations, I think. I don't know. I don't think we really spoke about this, but I know when I've been at my lowest point, she was always there. And I can't really say that, you know, was she hoping that I would eventually... No, I can't say that actually. I guess like she does have a belief that whatever hole I dug myself, I can climb out of it. But in terms of my sister's situation, it was more obvious and scary, meaning that, you know, her being a different person. I mean, like literally a different person. For me, it's more like I was at my low point, and then I'll have some high points as well, but it's still... I think it was a lot of it is me. You know, I'm doubting myself now. But yeah, but what I'm trying to say is it was a different situation. For my sister, there was it's, you know, if I was to say me and her, it's not about... And that's why I struggle to really talk about depression, because I think that it's so individual based that all I know is my sister's situation and my one, although there will be some overlaps, but ultimately it's very different because we're two different people. Even though we've been in the same household, you know, they say that, right? Where you have siblings, you live in the same household for, let's just say, 15, 20 years, both of your traits, how you look at the world, will be different. Someone who's older, someone's younger, someone who's in the middle. So that's the way I would put it. Yeah, we both went through different... we both had to overcome different challenges.
Obviously, if you don't mind me asking, what was your childhood like?
You know, parents were really busy. Coming over to the UK and then had me, but you know, their mentality has always been work hard work long hours. So I didn't really get to spend a lot of time with my parents. And yeah, I think didn't really get to spend a lot of time. On the other hand, I also joke about this as well. It's like, well, actually, it's not even a joke. It was real. It was like, I had the opportunity, because my parents were so busy, that during my childhood, I got to go out with friends, you know, where you actually knock at someone's door and say, hey, do you want to go out today?
Yeah.
Before mobile phones and stuff. So even though, there was, I didn't, in terms of spending time with parents, there wasn't a lot of that. And I'm sure it's part of the bigger picture of things, right? And, but at the same time, when I think of, I did manage to hang out with friends, we'll go to the park and play football and stuff, which I'm like, wow, that's a luxury compared to nowadays from what I see. But I digress. Yeah,
it's just so much when you see a lot of the content online around mental health issues, and sort of psychologist influencers often post around, things that happened in your childhood, your relationship with your parents, and how what we've come to understand is how it affects us today, and some of the challenges that we're then dealing with. And you obviously mentioned earlier about that term, your inner child, and how we're almost going through this process of reparenting ourselves, maybe because for some of us, our parents were too busy surviving to, give us the attention that we might have needed. I'm sure, again, not just myself, but many people listening to this right now, as time went on and as I got to know more people and find out a lot more about people and their histories and their childhoods, I started to realize that mine wasn't so unique, and that a lot of other people had similar experiences growing up, and similar family situations. Like, to have a sister who has quite severe mental health issues. She has bipolar disorder, and she is under medication for it. It's extremely challenging going through. You are a lot braver than me to talk about this.
You put me on the spot. No, but it's fascinating to me because the past, it's still surreal. It's very surreal. But if there's anything even at my lowest point, I knew there is always a way. As long as I keep moving forward, there will always be a way. And now I can confirm that for myself, because even when I said that to myself in the middle of it, there was part of me that said, I'm probably just lying to myself here. But either way, it's as long as I said to myself, keep moving forward, and because the alternative option would be to give up and not deal with it, and then you end up in a darker place potentially. And the way I was, whether could, I'm sure a big part of it is childhood and the way I've been brought up whatsoever. But nowadays, and even before, I only really thought more about it when I was working with a therapist. But nowadays, I'm in a very good place of, it is what it is. And again, how do I move forward with it? Because even if I, one great lesson I worked on with the therapist was, who didn't I have the best relationship with? Okay. Right, even though I don't really like writing, but it's like, okay, write a letter to that person. I freaked out. It's like, I am not sending this letter to that person. It's like, no, you're not. You're writing it out. And I believe it's to be more like, to face it and almost be at peace with it. I'm working on myself. I'm not changing the other person. And that was the flip of the switch for me. So, yeah, okay, that makes sense. So now, if I do come across someone who maybe, I didn't get along with in the past, there was a lot of misunderstanding, I accept it. But like, there's no more of, emotions that just comes out of nowhere because I'm thinking of the past. I'm not saying like I suppressed it and I'm pretending things didn't happen whatsoever, but it's more of like, I am present with it.
Who was that letter to?
To my dad. Yeah. And so, yeah. And during the time, during when we were working on it, it was hard because I was on that mentality of, why do I need to change? Right? And the therapist said, yeah, you're changing. It's for you. It's not for anyone else. And now I really understand it. So even though, now, my relationship with my dad has improved so much, but we never talk about this, and I hope he doesn't listen to this because that would be awkward. No, but in all seriousness, it's like, I've changed or evolved because certain things that's been built up, I can let go. Again, when I say let go, I'm not pretending like things didn't matter, right? But I can acknowledge it, but I can still, because if I'm okay, I'm okay with myself. When I have a conversation with my dad, I'm going to be in a better place. Yeah, so that's the way I see it.
That's amazing.
Can I just share with that in terms of the letter? That was quite a fun experience, not during the time, but it's like the therapist would say, "Hey, you wrote a letter yet?" No. Okay, what about if you jot some notes down? Okay, I'll try. No. It was just everything was just really hard. And also it didn't help that it just reminded me almost like a project and something to do with writing project. I was like, yeah, no, not for me. So we figured out a way where we just did it, during, we did it in bullet points. Some of the things that I remember, the good things, the not so great things. And even when I wrote that down, right, it wasn't like suddenly, oh man, I feel so much better now. Something within maybe that exercise or working with the therapist, I can't pinpoint exactly what day it was that I had the switch. It was almost like these are just seeds being planted. And even though I didn't get it at the beginning, I could then reflect back. So this is probably why we discussed about this, why we did this and did this, because now it makes sense to me. So that was my experience. And it was incredible. So it's very empowering. Because when maybe for others as well, but when you're in a desperate situation, you're desperate to look for answers. But then you just have to accept that it's not going to happen. But eventually when things do connect, it's worth it. So then now, I would like to think I'm I'm good at my job. But then now I always like to say like I'm even better now because of this experience. You know, I'm a better brother, a son, boyfriend, friends. We're getting there. You know, for a while I had to just keep a distance from friends whilst I go through this journey. But then now, you know, I would see my friends again. But yeah, there was definitely a part where I just had to distance myself from everyone so I can focus on myself.
In terms of, I mean, I suppose that's one thing that somewhat answers this next question. What things did you find helped you manage with all of this?
Well, during the therapy, at times it wasn't. It felt worse afterwards, but it was all part of it. And but again, I didn't really get a chance to ask the therapist, and I think she would also be on the same boat. It's like there's no definitive answer, but I'm always curious, like how did it work so well for me, relatively, because I haven't looked into it. I don't know what are other people's experience. But yeah, but there was something about it I kept coming back, because even as challenging as it was, there was always that hope that I could continue to unpack all this. And but to answer your question, what things helped, I realized a few things that when I reflect on it was helped. So jiu-jitsu was very obvious to me.
Okay.
Jiu-jitsu, only the sparring time, when you're sparring. So normally the format is you come in, you warm up as a group, and then the teacher will demonstrate the technique of the day, the concepts, find a partner, you drill, practice together, and then the last 10-15 minutes you will spar. During the first 45 minutes, it's very difficult, because anytime when I don't know how to, maybe like when I had to pay attention to something and it's very hard for me to pay attention to, I just end up my head somewhere else. But when it's sparring, when someone is trying to put a submission on you, and you can't help but to be present and problem solve, right? So even if someone is much heavier than me, high level, and end up in a top position where I'm on the floor, they're on top, and I'm somewhere very uncomfortable. I haven't tapped out yet because they haven't applied, but they're just making my life misery, right? That was still better. In fact, it was great because it actually helped me breathe, because day to day, I wasn't breathing efficiently because of, when I felt anxious, when I'm not present, my breathing gets affected, but you don't know this. Because as long as, and I think sometimes, I digress a bit, so I'll come back to this, right? So now when I think of it, sometimes I think of when someone, let's just say they're playing a sport, they injure themselves, right? They tore their ACL. In some ways, you can almost find comfort in that, where it's like, I had this accident and it confirmed to me I got a torn ACL. But when someone suddenly gets up from bed or tie the shoelace, comes out and they get back spasm, or they just twist it and I don't know, something like that, right? That's arguably a bit more challenging. It's like, where do you even start? What happened? It wasn't necessarily because they'd done a bad push or something. There was something there that was always building, and it just so happened when they bent down to tie the shoelace, that was the last straw. I digressed a bit. But anyway, so coming back to, why did I even make that connection again? But anyways, coming back to jiu-jitsu, right? Yeah, the breathing. So then I realized that the sparring allowed me to be present, and I had to breathe. And a good thing about jiu-jitsu, the gym that I'm at, it's such a good environment where when you get mauled by like high levels whatsoever, it's so normal. But because it's just the way it is, someone who's more experienced, and that's the nature of the game. But that's why it's good, because I can actually go there and get challenged to help myself regulate. And of course, no one else kind of really knows that, right? But I'm sure that's why. And then that made me connect. It's like, maybe this is why people do martial arts. You know, I'm classic people that got bullied in the past. Maybe, you know, they want to build their self-esteem, but also it's a way where they can be present. And so that's the jiu-jitsu side of things. Like I said, the first 45 minutes, sometimes it's like, in my mind, it's like, oh man, I need to get out of here. There's too many people. It's quiet when the teacher's demonstrating, but inside my mind, it's very noisy. But again, the gym is such a positive environment that even though I had these struggles here, it was fine. I still knew that I'm okay, right? And the other thing was and is Feldenkrais training. And I hesitate to say it because now you're going to ask me, so what is it? It's like, crap, I've been more busy embodying than
I might get you to maybe come back and talk about Feldenkrais another time, because it's probably like a really a much bigger sort of subject matter, as more so than just a tangent.
Yeah, I would say so. But I could say one of the most challenging things I've done is this 4-year training that I'm coming to the end of it. The first 3 years was very challenging. Even though if you look at what it is about and the way it's been done, you could just, you would assume it's just a walk in a park. A lot of the times it's lying on the floor, being aware of yourself, be curious. As an example, it's like, lie on the floor. What's the contact like with yourself on the floor? Where do you have the most contact? Could be shoulders, spine, hips, whatever the person feels. Is there one side that's more heavier than the other side? And it's all these questions that we're not looking for right or wrong. It's just questions for you to be curious about. But that was the most torturing thing for me. Because during the training, at times I was like, why are you asking me these questions? I need to get out of here because this is way too much. Because, and when I talked to that with the therapist, my challenge is to actually be within my body, like be more grounded, because I was so heavy up here, where anything I'm thinking of like to do with, I guess, my body, it wasn't really clear. So that's why when it came to something as simple as just checking with yourself when you lie on the floor, that was more difficult than someone owning me in jiu-jitsu.
There's a few times now you've mentioned being present and its correlation with regulating yourself, and the few different scenarios that all created that. Being present with your clients in their personal training session, being present in sparring in jiu-jitsu, being present in your Feldenkrais training when you're lying on the floor attempting to connect with your body. And it seems to me that being present is the thing that you were, and you've kind of alluded to it there just before I started talking, is what you were missing.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's safe to say that was it. At least one of the main things. But it's going through all that to then unpacking it here, realizing that I've mentioned it quite a few times, which then gives me like, oh yeah, that's probably it. At least a big piece of the puzzle.
Well, that was all. I would say it was almost very much unexpected. I didn't expect to. I've actually, I said at the beginning that I've kind of been able to observe your journey as you went through it. So I wasn't expecting to go on a whole new journey in this episode with you now, and that's exactly what it's felt like. So I just want to say thank you for that. Thank you for coming down and sharing all that with us, because if whoever's listening is feeling how I'm feeling right now, then it was worth you coming down to tell us all of that. So I really do want to say thank you for that. I'm going to ask one last question. And it's just a question that is just designed around being a little bit introspective, which I guess we've kind of been doing anyway. And I feel like this one might be a fun one for you. If someone gave you a box of everything you've ever lost, what would be the first thing that you'd look for?
My passport. What would be I don't really own a lot of things, so honestly that's quite for some odd reason it's a tricky question. No, don't know. Maybe I'll have to come back to you on that one.
That one.
Don't want to disappoint you, but yeah, my mind just went blank. I don't.
Yeah, I suppose anybody thinking about that question, I think if the things that used to matter to you in terms of material objects probably were more from when we're younger, when we're kids. Material objects are very important to us, and then we do lose things over time. They either stop becoming of interest to us because we've grown out of it. They wear and tear, so they're no longer of use to us. And maybe over time we kind of just learn not to attach ourselves too much to things. Whether it's a car, whether it's a jacket, whether it's anything material, and I'm sure there are things that have some sort of sentimental value to us. That weirdly coloured pebble that you found on a beach that reminds you of a good time with your family, or this very specific toy that someone that you care about that's no longer with you gave you when you were X years old. So yeah, even asking that question and thinking about it, I guess, it's probably been a long time since you cared about an object.
Yeah, not as much as I need to, I'd say. Maybe again, it comes back, the first thing I'll look for is the secret to being present. That's what I'll be looking for.
Fair.
Because if, to wrap up what I said in all of this is, regardless of what has happened in the past, whether good or bad, now, it's because I never really understood it before. And the last thing I wanted to hear when I was going through all that is just try and be present. What the fuck does that even mean, right? But for me now, I'm clear the way I see it. Me being present is whoever I'm with, especially people who I care about, majority of the time at least, I am there. Again, to be the decent brother, boyfriend, son, and etc. And it's only because I have worked on the challenges and I'm in a better position for myself. And so because I'm in a better position, you can call it energy, but you're giving out good energy. I don't personally, I don't believe that everything should be positive, for example, because that's an extreme. There's a reason why we have different types of emotions, but it's being able to experience it and understand it, acknowledge it, rather than going to the other extreme when you're really, you have to be either really happy or something happened and you have to be really sad and angry or whatsoever. I don't know if that just makes sense, but yeah, all this experience has just made me, being able to unpack a lot of stuff.
Amazing. All right, Felix, thank you so much for sharing all that. I guess I don't know if we'll get a chance to talk about this again, and hopefully we'll get a chance to maybe unpack more on around Feldenkrais. I'll put your social media handles in the description, so if anyone wants to look you up for any of your personal training practices, they can get in touch with you there. But yeah, just thank you for coming down, and I'm sure somebody out there, very least me, has found that really, really, really helpful to hear. Thank you.
Great, thank you.